The suit smelled like pennies and old rainwater, and the techs wouldn't look me in the eye when they zipped me into it. That's how I knew the draw wasn't random. They call it the Atlantic like it's one thing, like it isn't a whole stacked world. Sunlight layer, twilight layer, midnight layer, pressure layer where the ocean stops acting like water and starts acting like an opinion, heavy, absolute, and not open to discussion. Down there, about 3 miles under, our sonar hit something that didn't behave like matter. We were mapping a slow, ugly seismic bruise, an anomaly on the bottom that showed up after a chain of deep microquakes. The kind of thing that usually means a vent field or a new scar in the crust or a pocket of gas about to make someone's uncrewed drone into confetti. Instead, the waves just refused. Sound went around it the way it goes around a mountain. Not through, not into. There was a dark square on every scan where the ocean seemed to politely pretend nothing existed. At first we thought instrument fault. Then we swapped instruments. Then we swapped boats. Then a French vessel with a crew that laughs at American safety standards ran the same passes and got the same blank box. The Russians acted bored and wouldn't share their raw data, which was basically a confession. By day 5, the phrase non-reflective solid was being said with a straight face, and by day 9, there were suits in our mess hall who'd never been on a ship in their lives, but knew where the cameras were. They convened a commission. They used words like international and multi-agency and resource sharing. They used them the way you put prayer flags on a collapsing bridge. The box stayed. The drones found an opening. It wasn't a door. It wasn't a hatch. It was a slit, just wide enough for a human shoulder if you turned right and didn't mind scraping the shit out of your hard shell. A seam that ran like a wound between 2 slabs of something black and speckled, like wet basalt with a glittering rash. On camera, it looked almost normal until the light hit it wrong, and then it looked like a star field, like somebody trapped the night sky inside rock. The drone had tried to go in. It made it maybe 15 feet before its feed cut into gray snow. They recovered it. The chassis was crushed like a soda can, except the pressure at that depth should have crushed it outside the cube, not inside. Its internal clock was also wrong. It thought it had been running for 4 days. That's when they decided it had to be a person, because machines don't get disoriented. Machines don't come back with the kind of errors you can't file under mechanical failure. And if there was a trap in there, if it was a weapon or a vault or whatever the paranoid part of the commission wanted it to be, then a human on a tether and a live feed was a better sacrifice than $1 million robot that might come back with nothing but corrupted files. So they built a suit. Not the suits you see in documentaries with the dome helmet and the big charming manipulator claws. This thing was closer to a coffin you could move your arms inside. A pressure-compensated exoskin with redundant seals, layered ceramics, flexible joints full of gel, and enough sensors to make you feel like you were being watched even when you were alone in a storage bay. Only one was finished in time. Only one could fit through the slit. And because I was the only one on the team who'd done saturated dives and confined space salvage, because I was the only one who could keep my hands steady when my brain wanted to panic, because I'd already been labeled difficult by 3 different supervisors and was, therefore, politically expendable, I drew the shortest straw. They called a draw. They smiled. They slapped my shoulder like we were at a barbecue and not about to drop me into a place sound couldn't enter. I remember standing in the suit bay with the harness hanging like a flayed animal and thinking absurdly that if I puked, it would just float around inside my helmet until I choked on it. Dr. Halden, commission chair, American, perfect teeth, held up a laminated card like he was presenting an award. Operational notes, he said. Read them, then read them again. He didn't hand it to me at first. He held it, waited for the cameras. His eyes flicked to the lens. Then he placed it in my gloved hand like he was giving communion. The card had 5 rules printed in blocky black font, the kind you use when you don't want anyone to pretend they misread anything. Rule 1. Keep your tether under constant tension. If it goes slack, stop moving until topside confirms line status. Rule 2. Do not strike the interior surfaces. No hammering, no tapping, no deliberate vibration. Rule 3. If you see particulate matter rising up inside the structure, do not attempt to collect it. Mark and report only. Rule 4. If audio drops to 0, do not speak for 10 seconds. Breathe slow. Confirm your own sound returns before you talk. Rule 5. If you locate a freestanding object, do not remove it unless it is mechanically secured. Rule 4 almost made me laugh. If audio drops to 0, like silence was a button that could be pressed. Rule 2 felt like superstition. Rule 3 felt arbitrary. Rule 5 felt safe. Common sense even. Don't grab loose things in an unknown environment. Sure, fine. Rule 1 was the only one that sounded like it came from someone who'd ever been dragged in a current. I tucked the card into the suit's chest pocket behind the emergency chem light. It made the pocket bulge against my ribs. Behind Halden, 2 security guys watched me the way you watch a dog you don't trust not to bite. Any questions? Halden asked. I had 100. I swallowed them like nails. What happens if I don't come back? I said instead. A pause, just long enough to be a decision. We'll mourn, he said, and the way he said it made it a lie. They lowered me from a stern platform at dawn because dawn makes people feel like God's paying attention. The first mile was like sinking through cold syrup. The suit's heaters kept my skin from turning into brittle meat, but the cold still got into my teeth, into the roots like little drills. The ocean got darker in steps. The surface noise died. The world narrowed to the hiss of my breathing and the occasional click of the comms relay. At 1,000 feet, the support ship was a dim smear above. At 5,000, there was nothing. No up, no down. Just my suit lights cutting a weak cone through black water full of slow-falling snow. Marine detritus, dead things, things that would die later. My tether ran up into darkness. It was my only geometry. Down around me, the cube began to resolve. Not a cube exactly, not in the cute sense. More like a massive, perfect edge box settled on the seafloor like somebody dropped a building from space and it stuck. Its surface didn't look like rock. It didn't look like metal. It didn't look like anything that belonged in salt water. The speckled black panels drank my light and gave it back wrong, as if the photons had to negotiate for a return ticket. And the strangest part, the ocean around it felt still. Not calm, not peaceful, still like a hell breath. My instruments were trying to make sense of it. Salinity normal, temperature normal for depth, pressure normal outside the suit, astronomical. But my current meter flickered like it couldn't decide if I was moving or the world was. Approached the seam, came the voice in my ear. It wasn't Halden. It was Mission Ops, someone who'd been trained to sound like they cared. I finned down to the slit the drone had found. It was narrower in person. It looked like the box had been cut and then pressed back together, leaving only a thin, straight gap. The edges were too clean. The seam ran up and down like it wanted to be a door, but refused to commit. I centered myself, checked tether tension. Rule 1, constant tension. Line tension good, I said. Copy. Enter when ready. I wanted to tell them to go fuck themselves. I wanted to tell them it wasn't a door, it was a throat, and I was about to crawl into it. Instead, I turned sideways, pressed my shoulder into the slit, and started to wriggle. The suit didn't like it. The hard point scraped. My helmet bumped the edge, and the sound in my skull was a deep, ugly thunk. I felt it in my molars. Rule 2, don't strike the surfaces. I froze just for a second, and the comms crackled with someone's intake of breath. Keep going, Ops said quickly, like they were afraid stopping would make it worse. I forced myself forward in tiny, controlled shoves. The slit squeezed my suit, squeezed my ribs. The outer material made a faint squeal as it dragged. The light changed. Not darker, not brighter, just wrong. Like I'd slid into a camera that wasn't calibrated for reality. Then, with a final scrape that made my skin crawl, the pressure on my sides released, and I drifted free into open space. The ocean should have sounded the same. Water is water. Even 3 miles down, Your suit should pick up low-frequency rumble, distant cracks, the sigh of currents. Instead, the sound died. Not muffled, not lowered, zeroed. It was like someone reached into my head and unplugged the world. My breathing suddenly sounded obscene, wet, loud, intimate. Every inhale was a confession. Every exhale, a leaking secret. Rule 4 snapped into my mind like a slap. If audio drops to 0, do not speak for 10 seconds. So I didn't. I counted in my head. My heart thumped too fast. My fingers tingled where the suit pressed. The silence wasn't empty. It had weight. It pressed on my ears from the inside. At 9 seconds, my comms made the faintest chirp, like a bird trying to sing through plastic. At 10, a whisper of static returned. I didn't know if it was my own sound returning, or if I'd just obeyed a ritual and been allowed to live. "Comms," Op said, voice thin. "I'm here," I said, and my voice sounded far away, like it belonged to a dead man in a different room. "Video is stable. How's the interior?" I turned slowly. My lights washed over a massive floor of panels. Perfect squares, fitted together with seams so tight you couldn't have slid a hair through them. They stretched out farther than my cone of light could reach. Above, the roof vanished into darkness, too high or too far, or maybe not there at all. It didn't feel like I was inside a box anymore. It felt like the box had eaten a piece of space and was keeping it. The floor panels weren't identical. Each square had a faint texture etched into it. Lines, curves, stipples, like fingerprints made by someone with a compass and a steady hand. I crouched, ran my gloved fingertips over one. The texture was there, shallow but precise. My glove couldn't feel like skin, but the suit fed micro-vibrations back into my fingers. The panel's pattern translated into a soft buzzing that rose and fell as I moved. "Floor is segmented," I reported. "Each panel has some kind of etched pattern." "Copy. Proceed to target zone," Ops said. Target zone. Like there was a map. Like they knew what was in here. My lights caught something ahead. A few panels removed, leaving rectangular cavities in the floor, like open drawers. I approached slowly, careful with tether tension. The line ran behind me in a gentle arc. It looked too thin for the distance it represented. The first cavity held a shallow box inside the floor. The box's walls were the same black, speckled material. At the bottom was a diagram, carved in pale stone and laid into the darkness. Two human figures. One male, one female, stylized, not detailed. Arms out, legs apart, like those old anatomical sketches in textbooks. Between them, in the center, a shallow depression shaped like a cylinder. My suit camera zoomed without me asking. The feed was being watched, and somebody topside was getting excited. Visual confirmed, Ops murmured, "Do not touch." "I'm not touching." I snapped because something about being told not to touch made me want to tear the place apart. Beside the cavity stood a slender pedestal, also black, also speckled, with a glass cylinder mounted upright in metal clamps. The cylinder was about the length of a pencil, maybe shorter. Clear glass. Inside, a faint shimmer. It took my brain a second to accept that there was no dust floating, no current. The shimmer wasn't particles in water. It was the thing itself. I leaned closer. The cylinder was filled with clear liquid, and in that liquid were thin, pale strands, like hair, like spider silk, like something that didn't belong in glass. "Specimen in clamp," I reported. "Looks like filament suspended. Do not remove," Ops said immediately. Rule 5. If you locate a freestanding object, do not remove it unless it is mechanically secured. This one was mechanically secured, so by their own rules, removing it would be allowed if I could undo the clamp. But their tone said no. Their tone said they wanted it to stay right where it was until they figured out how to own it. I shifted my light to the next open cavity. The diagram there wasn't human. It was an animal I recognized because my dad had been obsessed with prehistoric documentaries when I was a kid. A squat mammal with tusks. The kind of thing that died out and never got to regret anything. Next cavity, a whale. Sleek, familiar curve of flukes. Next, something like a lizard, but the proportions were wrong. Too many joints, a tail that split. Each cavity had the same depression for a cylinder. Each cavity, except the first, was empty. And as I panned my light, I realized there were hundreds of panels. Thousands. A whole grid. A whole archive under my boots. Each one maybe holding a cylinder. Each one labeled with a carved silhouette of something that had lived, or could have lived, or maybe hadn't yet. My throat went dry inside my helmet. This is I started. Ops cut in. We see it. That was the first time they'd admitted they were seeing what I was seeing. Before, they'd been treating me like a camera on legs. Now, their voice had something in it. Something like reverence or hunger. My job was supposed to be simple. Enter, record, extract a sample of possible leave. That's what the mission brief said. The mission brief also said unknown composition, unknown risk. It didn't say catalog of life. I should have been odd. I should have been the brave explorer in a documentary, whispering about mankind's place in the universe. Instead, the first thing that came up was a memory of Halden smiling for the cameras and telling me we'll mourn. The second thing was my ex, Elise, laughing at my apartment, telling me it smelled like loneliness, like it was a joke she could share with her friends later. The third thing was the way my team lead back on the salvage rig used to call me hero in that voice men use when they mean tool. I didn't feel like part of humanity down here. Not because I was deep underwater, because I could see the shape of things, creatures reduced to symbols, to little carved cartoons, and suddenly it was obvious that we were all just items, pieces, boxes in a floor. I knelt by a closed panel and tried to lift it. The seam was so tight, I couldn't get a grip. I wedged my fingers into the microscopic gap anyway and pulled. The panel didn't budge. I braced my boots and pulled again, harder, feeling the suit's servos engage. My shoulders ached inside the harness. The tether jerked when a hair slack. Rule 1, if it goes slack, stop moving. But the panel gave a millimeter. I pulled again. The panel rose with a grinding reluctance, like it didn't want to be disturbed, like the box resented me. Finally, it came free with a soft pop that I felt on my wrists. I lifted it aside and peered into the cavity. There was the cylinder nestled in its depression. Clear liquid, pale strands, and at the bottom, the carved silhouette of something I didn't recognize. It looked wrong. A stout abdomen like a sack. 2 long legs sprouting from either side like stilts. A beak, huge, curved, predatory, sticking out from the front like it was the whole point of the creature. There are no eyes in the carving, or maybe there were, and they were just not where I expected them. It wasn't dinosaur. It wasn't bird. It wasn't anything my brain had a folder for. My stomach tightened. Found an unknown specimen, I said, voice quieter. Diagram resembles. I don't know. Something organic but unfamiliar. There was a pause on comms, and in that pause I could hear, faintly, someone breathing topside. Not me. Someone else was too close to a mic. Do not remove, Ops said again. But the words were softer now, like a plea. I should have listened. I reached down and tried to lift the cylinder with 2 fingers. The glass felt normal for a split second, cool and smooth through my glove's tactile feedback. Then it resisted. Not physically, more like my hand didn't belong near it. Like 2 magnets pushed the wrong way. I tightened my grip. The cylinder shattered. Not cracked, not chipped. It failed in a clean, sudden burst, like it had been waiting for permission to stop pretending to be solid. The sensation in my glove was sharp and ugly as the suit's tactile system registered impact. My hand recoiled on instinct. A few tiny shards ricocheted and floated. And then the strands, the pale filaments that had been suspended in liquid, lifted. They didn't drift. They didn't swirl. They rose in a straight line, as if up had been defined for them, even though gravity in water is complicated and should have made them waver. They rose toward the darkness above, toward the seam. My throat closed. Rule 3. If you see particulate matter rising up inside the structure, do not attempt to collect it. Mark and report only. I hadn't even known what that rule meant until I watched those strands move like they were being summoned. Ops, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The contents are rising, like ascending. I see it, Ops whispered. Mark location. Do not pursue. But my light followed them anyway, a reflex like watching smoke. They vanished into black. Just gone. Copy, I lied. My heart wouldn't slow down. The suit's internal fans whirred to scrub CO2, and the whirring felt too loud in the returning near silence. The shattered cylinder's liquid dispersed quickly, dissolving into the water like it never existed. The shards drifted down. The carved creature remained, staring up at me in pale lines, like an accusation. I backed away from the open cavity, and my heel caught the edge of another panel. It shifted slightly under my weight like it wasn't locked. I froze, expecting alarms, expecting the floor to swallow me. Nothing happened. I exhaled shakily and forced myself to look away from the unknown creature. Curiosity is a sickness. It feels like intelligence while it kills you. I turned toward the pedestal with the clamped cylinder I'd seen first. This one had looked different even from a distance. The liquid inside wasn't clear. It was dark, not black, dark red, like old blood. My suit's camera auto-adjusted exposure, and the cylinder's color deepened into something more honest. The red wasn't uniform. It moved in slow, lazy folds, as if it was thicker than water, as if it had its own gravity. I circled the pedestal carefully, keeping my tether from snagging on the removed panels. The pedestal was smooth and seamless, rising from the floor like it had grown there. Above it, in the far darkness of the ceiling, something caught my light. At first, I thought it was a reflection. Then I realized the cube didn't reflect. It was an object, an obelisk-like structure embedded overhead, holding shapes. My stomach sank as I focused my beam. Skulls. Not human. Not any animal I knew. Stone-carved skulls with elongated crowns and too many ridges, like the sculptor had tried to invent anatomy and got angry halfway through. Their empty sockets weren't round. They were angled, slitted, like they belonged to something that looked at the world sideways. There were several of them, arranged in a rough circle around the obelisk, facing outward, not looking at the pedestal, looking away, as if the skulls refused to watch what was happening below. I felt my skin prickle under the suit. Ops, I said, and my voice cracked embarrassingly. There are carved skulls overhead. Silence on the line. Not the cube silence. Human silence. The kind where someone is deciding what to admit. Then Halden's voice came through, smooth as oil. He'd been there the whole time, of course, just waiting for his cue. Describe them, he said. Stone, alien, or stylized. They're facing away from the pedestal. Halden exhaled like a man getting what he wanted. Proceed. That one word made me want to vomit. I leaned closer to the cylinder. The clamps holding it weren't like anything I'd seen on the ship. They were metal, but not steel, not titanium. Too dark, too matte. The arms of the clamps were thin and elegant, like jewelry made for someone with different hands. My suit's chemical sensor pinged. It was trying to identify the liquid. It gave up and displayed unknown with a little warning triangle like it was offended. I stared at the red and tried to think like a scientist, like a professional, like a person who hadn't been dragged through his own life by other people's whims. But my mind kept going back to the floor. Each cavity had been labeled with a diagram. Each cavity had been meant to hold a cylinder. Some had been empty, like their contents had been removed long ago or had never been placed. And the one cylinder clamped upright, guarded by skulls that looked away, felt different. Felt central, like a key, like a button. I remembered something from the brief. A sentence Halden had said like it was nothing. There appears to be a central pedestal. He'd known, maybe not what it meant, but he'd known it mattered. I moved my light across the pedestal's base. There were etched patterns there too, shallow lines like the floor panels. A loop, a spiral, a shape that looked like a mouth. My suit's haptic feedback buzzed faintly as my glove traced it, like the pedestal was humming in response. "Do you want me to remove it?" I asked, and I hated how calm my voice sounded, like I was offering someone a cup of coffee. Halden didn't answer immediately. I could imagine him in some warm room, surrounded by screens, his hands clean, his suit non-existent. Rule 5. Ops whispered, almost to themselves. Rule 5. If you locate a freestanding object, do not remove it unless it is mechanically secured. It was mechanically secured by clamps, which meant it was removable by design. And the deceptively safe rule suddenly felt like a trap with polite wording. Halden finally spoke. "Do not remove it yet. Document. Examine clamps. Determine if removal is possible without damage." Without damage. As if the damage was the only thing that mattered. I leaned in and examined the clamps more closely. There were no screws, no latches, no obvious release. The clamp arms curved around the cylinder like fingers that refused to let go. I thought about the shattered vial on the floor. I'd barely touched it and it had burst like a bubble. This one hadn't shattered when the drone's lights hit it, at least. It sat there, steady, confident. I raised my hand, hesitated. For a second, I saw Elise again, standing in my doorway with a cardboard box of her stuff, face bored, eyes already gone somewhere else. "You take things too seriously," she'd said. "It's exhausting. Like my love was a chore. Like my fear was inconvenient. Like I was a machine that should perform without needing maintenance." I'd wanted to scream at her then. Instead, I'd watched her leave, because I was always watching people leave. I thought about my father dying in a hospice that smelled like bleach and sorrow, asking me if I was doing okay while he was the one fading. I thought about my supervisor on the rig patting my cheek after a dangerous salvage and saying, "See, you're useful, useful." Down here, in a place that cataloged life like spare parts, the word took on a different weight. I forced myself to breathe slowly. The suit's internal display ticked my oxygen levels. Everything normal. Everything fine. I touched the clamp. The metal was cold through my glove's feedback. The moment my fingers closed around it, a faint click traveled through the pedestal, like something inside had acknowledged me. And then the clamps loosened. Not by me pulling, not by me twisting anything. They just relaxed. The cylinder shifted slightly, as if it had been waiting. My hand hovered, sudden fear spiking. "Halden," I said, "the clamp is releasing." "Good," he said, and his voice was too eager now. "Take it. Secure it in the sample sleeve." Sample sleeve. Like it was a rock. Like it wasn't a blood-red mystery guarded by skulls that refused to watch. I hesitated, and in that hesitation something else happened. The silence deepened. It wasn't just no sound. It was the feeling of being inside a held breath again, but stronger, focused. My suit's audio meters flickered, then flattened. 0. Rule 4 slammed into my mind. Do not speak for 10 seconds. But this time it felt less like a safety note and more like an instruction from the room itself. I stared up at the skulls. Their empty sockets faced away. Every one of them, except one. One skull, only one, was angled just slightly wrong, as if it had slipped over time. Its socket wasn't looking fully away. It was looking down, at me, at my hand hovering over the red cylinder. A cold trickle ran along my spine, even through the suit. I couldn't tell if it was sweat or pure fear. I didn't speak. I counted. 1, 2, 3. My helmet lights flickered once, a tiny dip, like someone blinked the power. The skull's shadow shifted. 4, 5. Something moved in the darkness above the pedestal. Not the skulls. Something behind them, deeper, where my light didn't reach. A subtle displacement, like oil moving underwater. 6, 7. My tether twitched. A gentle tug upward. Rule 1. Keep constant tension. The line had been steady. Now it pulled like something topside had decided to reel me in without telling me. 8, 9. The red liquid inside the cylinder rippled. Not from my movement, Not from current, there was no current, but from something like anticipation. 10. Static whispered back into my ears. I didn't wait. I grabbed the cylinder. I wrapped my fingers around it, firm but careful. The glass felt warmer than it should. Not hot, just not dead cold like everything else. Specimen retrieved, I said, voice too tight. It's in hand. Secure it, Halden snapped. Now. I turned to reach for the sample sleeve mounted on my suit's thigh, and my tether went slack. Not a little slack, not a gentle curve, slack like it had been cut. The line floated, drifting in a lazy S shape behind me, the end disappearing into darkness where the seam was supposed to be. My stomach dropped so hard I felt like I was falling even though my boots were planted on the floor. "Oh, ops," I said, and I hated the stutter. My tether is slack. I don't have tension." No answer. I tried comms again. "Ops, Halden, do you copy?" Only my breathing answered me. Loud, wet, Benedict. Rule 1 said stop moving until topside confirms line status. But there was no topside anymore. There was only the cube, the floor full of boxes, the skull that had turned its gaze toward me, and the blood-red cylinder in my hand that felt like a beating thing. I lifted my head toward the seam, toward where I'd come in. My lights found it easily. The slit was there, a bright wound of darkness in the wall. Except something was in it now, not blocking it completely, just occupying it. A thin veil of pale strands, drifting upward like smoke, gathered in the seam like a nest of hair. The same strands that had risen from the shattered vial. Only now there were more, many more, coiling, layering, weaving themselves into a soft, living curtain. And behind that curtain, where the ocean should have been, there was no water movement. No life, just flat black, like the cube had closed its throat behind me. My gloved hand tightened on the cylinder without me telling it to. The red liquid inside swirled faster, hugging the glass like it was trying to get out. In the pocket of my chest, the laminated rule card pressed against my ribs like a heartbeat I didn't trust. I backed up one step, boots scraping panel seams. The skull overhead seemed to tilt a fraction more, as if it was settling into a better view. And in the silence that followed, between my breaths, between my thoughts, I realized something I hadn't let myself accept since the commission smiled and called it a draw. I wasn't the explorer down here. I was the offering. My first instinct was stupidly human. I yanked the tether like it was a dog leash, and I could scold the ocean into behaving. The line floated, soft and useless, swaying in that slow, syrupy way things move when nothing else is moving. I followed it with my light, expecting to see the end frayed, snapped, maybe crushed in the seam. There was no end. It just kept going into the black like it had always been there, like it wasn't attached to anything at all, like the concept of ship above had been erased and my brain was the only thing still insisting it existed. I squeezed my eyes shut inside the helmet hard. Opened them. Same. Breathing loud. Heart loud. Silence heavy. In my chest pocket, the laminated rule card pressed against me. I could feel it through layers of suit like a splinter in bone. Rule 1. Keep your tether under constant tension. If it goes slack, stop moving until topside confirms line status. Goo. Great. Topside wasn't confirming shit. Topside was gone, or I was. I keyed the comms again. Ops. Halden. Anybody. Say something. Static. A faint chirp. Nothing that sounded like a person. I had the red cylinder in my right hand. It felt heavier now. Not physically, my suit would have told me. It felt heavier in my mind, like a decision had already been made and I was just dragging my feet on it. I turned back to the seam. The pale strands had thickened. They weren't just hanging there anymore. They had structure. Cords braided on cords, like hair in a shower drain. Like the inside of a bird's nest made by something that didn't know what a bird was. They held in place without wobbling, as if up, inside the cube was a command, not a direction. Beyond them, flat black. No drifting is no. No little sparkles of marine crud. No sense of water at all. The cube wasn't blocking the exit. The cube was making sure there was nothing to exit into dash. I backed away from the seam, slow, boots squeaking against panel seams. My knee bumped one of the removed floor panels, and it clacked softly against another. The skull overhead, still the one angled wrong, seemed to deepen its shadow across me. I kept telling myself it was just my light moving. Just angles. Just paranoia. But paranoia is what your body calls it when you notice the truth before your brain is ready. Okay, I said aloud, because talking in a silence is how humans keep from breaking. Okay, we're still doing the job. We're still professionals. The words sounded like a joke. I looked down at the sample sleeve on my thigh. It was a thick polymer tube with a seal cap, designed for rocks, metal fragments, anything you could shove inside and pretend it was inert. I lifted the red cylinder toward it. The liquid swirled faster. I swear to God it did. It wasn't sloshing from my movement. It was moving in a slow, intentional curl, like smoke trapped in glass. My suit's chemical sensor pinged again, like it was trying to be helpful. Unknown. Warning. Fuck you. I muttered at the sensor. In the silence, the words felt too intimate. Like the cube heard everything and remembered. I started to slide the cylinder into the sleeve. Halfway in, the comm snapped to life with a burst of harsh static that made me flinch so hard my neck cramped inside the harness. Then a voice, thin, strained, cut through. Don't. Another crackle. Hear me? Ops. I said too loud. Listen, the voice rasped. Not Ops. Not Halden. A different accent. Familiar in a weird way. One of the divers. One of the guys who'd helped bolt me into this suit. Who is this? I snapped, because anger is easier than fear. Jesse, he said. It's Jesse. Comms are weird. Halden's locking channels. He's not letting Ops. Static ate half the sentence. Jesse, I said, slower now, like I was calming a skittish animal. Where's my tether? Why is it slack? A pause. A wet sound like Jesse swallowing. It's not slack, he said, and his voice broke on the last word. I blink hard. What do you mean it's not slack? It is slack. I'm looking at it. It's static still on the winch. Tension is fine topside. The readout says you're more static. Still online. Still in water. You didn't go. He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. The implication sat between us like a dead fish. You didn't go anywhere, which meant the cube wasn't somewhere I'd entered. The cube was somewhere my senses had been moved or edited. I looked at the tether again, and for a heartbeat, I could almost pretend it was taut. Like my eyes wanted to obey Jesse and make the world correct. But it floated. It mocked me. Jesse, I said, tell Halden to open the channel. Now. A brittle laugh. He won't. He's losing his mind. He keeps saying if we can get the sample, it's worth any. Static. Worth any cost. I felt my jaw tighten so hard my teeth hurt. Of course. A fucking course. The same line every man in a warm room uses when someone else is bleeding. I stared at the red cylinder, half in the sample sleeve. Half out, suspended between secure it for the commission and do literally anything else. Jesse, I said quietly, what else do you know? He hesitated. In the background, I heard voices shouting, muffled through his mic, distant but real. A sharp command. Halden's voice, clipped and furious. Jesse flinched audibly. They didn't build one suit, Jesse whispered. They built two. The first one failed testing. They said it was a material flaw, but I saw the cut. It wasn't a flaw. It was light. Static again, but not calm static. Like something else was grinding in the signal. Like someone took a razor to it. My stomach turned. Why the fuck are you telling me this now? I hissed. Because I don't think you're coming back, Jesse said, and his voice went flat with terror. And because Halden, he's talking about flooding the line, pumping something through to... He stopped. Another shout in the background. Jesse's breathing went fast. To what? I demanded. To force the sample up, Jesse said. He thinks if you can't come back, the line can. He thinks. A hard burst of static, and then Halden's voice, suddenly loud and clean. Enough, Halden said, and it was the most human he'd sounded so far. Angry, scared, controlling. Subject, do you copy? Subject, not my name, not even Diver. Subject, my hand tightened on the cylinder. The glass creaked faintly in my grip, or maybe that was my imagination. I copy, I said, and I surprised myself with how calm it came out. Like something in me had finally settled. Good, Halden said. You will secure the cylinder and return to the seam. Ops will guide you out. That's funny, I said. Ops hasn't said a word to me in 5 minutes. A pause. I heard Halden inhale, like he was preparing a speech that would be recorded later and played back at some hearing. Communications are intermittent, he said carefully. You are to follow procedure. I almost laughed. Almost. The sound would have been ugly. My tether went slack, I said. Your procedure says stop moving. I stopped. Now what? Another pause. Halden's voice sharpened. You are not to interpret procedure. You are to follow it. There it was. The real Halden. The one who didn't believe in rules as safety, only as obedience. I'm going to the seam. I lied again because something in me had clicked into place. They didn't deserve honesty. They didn't deserve my cooperation. They deserved what they'd built. Good, Halden said, relief bleeding through. Do not tamper with any other objects. Do not remove. Yeah, I cut him off. I read your stupid fucking card. I reached into my chest pocket with my free hand and pulled the laminated card out. It floated slightly on the suit's tether clip, bumping against my forearm. The black printed rules stared back at me, smug as a priest. Rule 5, the deceptively safe one. The one that made taking the cylinder sound allowed because it was clamped. I realized suddenly that the rules weren't about keeping me safe. They were about keeping the cube safe from me, keeping the contents from being disturbed in the wrong way, keeping me from doing anything that wasn't retrieve the thing we want. Rule 3, if you see particulate matter rising up inside the structure, do not attempt to collect it. Mark and report only, because it rises and it leaves, because it escapes, because they don't want it loose. Rule 2, do not strike the interior surfaces, because it listens, because vibration wakes something, or opens something, or makes it respond. Rule 4, if audio drops to 0, do not speak for 10 seconds, because maybe the cube is listening for voice, for sound, for patterns. Maybe silence is a language here, and speaking at the wrong time is like screaming in a church. Halden kept talking, listing steps like I was a malfunctioning machine. I let him. While he spoke, I looked away from the seam and panned my lights across the floor again, across the grid, across the open cavities with their carved diagrams. I'd only opened one extra panel, the unknown beak thing, and it had shattered the moment I tried to remove the cylinder. The strands had risen like they were being called home. Home! The word made me feel sick. I moved deeper into the chamber, away from the seam, away from the curtain of strands. My boots thudded softly. Each step felt like trespassing on a grave. Subject, Halden snapped. Your video indicates you are moving away from the exit. I'm orienting, I said, and there was a bite in it. You are disobeying a direct order. That's kind of been my thing, I said, and it felt good, stupidly. It felt like spitting blood back into someone's face. Halden's voice went cold. If you do not comply, you will be held responsible for the consequences. I stopped walking and just stood there breathing. Consequences, I repeated softly. To who? Silence. Human silence again. He knew what I meant. He knew I meant me. He knew he was already planning to bury me under classified paperwork and call it tragedy. I resumed walking. My light swept over more cavities, more diagrams. Some were beautiful in their simplicity. Fish, bird, mammal, insect-like shapes. Some were abstract enough that my brain couldn't latch on. Some looked like nightmares etched by someone with a steady hand and no empathy. And many were empty. Depressions waiting, like a library after a fire. I realized slowly what this was. Not a vault, not a weapon cache, not a device. A seed bank, an archive of beginnings. Each cylinder wasn't just DNA. It was a template, a recipe, a switch. I'd seen gene banks in documentaries, frozen samples in steel tanks. This was the same idea, just older, or smarter, or alien. Whoever built this had treated life like modular parts. If a species failed, you could put the cylinder back in and start again. And if you wanted a species to fail, maybe you had a different cylinder. My gaze drifted back to the pedestal, to the red vial, and then to the skulls above it. Why did the skulls look away? Because the red vial was shameful, dangerous, forbidden? Or because the builders didn't want to witness what it did? I drifted closer to the pedestal again despite myself. The red vial still sat in my hand, half-sleeved. I hadn't secured it. I hadn't committed. Halden's voice in my ear softened, like he'd sensed he was losing control. We are very close to a historic breakthrough. Do not let emotion compromise this mission. Emotion, like my fear, was a toddler tantrum. Like my life was a variable to be minimized. I stared up at the skulls again. Their empty sockets seemed deeper now. Not carved hollows, but holes into something else. The one angled toward me felt like an eye. Halden, I said slow, what is the red vial? A pause. I could hear him thinking, calculating what to admit. We do not know, he said. Bullshit, I said quietly. Another pause. We have hypotheses, he admitted, based on the architecture, based on the arrangement of the samples, based on the fact that most compartments are missing their cylinders, suggesting either removal or dispersal. And the red one, I said. It is distinct, Halden said. That's not an answer. Halden exhaled like he was irritated at being dragged down to my level. If the other cylinders represent templates for life, genetic material, stored and labeled, then the red cylinder may represent a countermeasure. Countermeasure, a polite word. Like an off switch, I said. He didn't answer. Silence, again. The cube's silence pressed in around his human silence. And suddenly it felt like the chamber was listening to both of us and judging the one who lied. I looked down at the red vial in my hand. Its liquid moved like a living thing. And you want me to bring that to you? I said. Yes, Halden said immediately. Too quick, too eager. Secure it in return. I swallowed. Images flooded me, uninvited, because the brain does that when it smells danger. The rig, the cramped sleeping quarters, Elise's face, my father's hospice bed, the team lead's smirk, the commission's cameras, the way they'd all looked at me like I was a tool, and the way I'd let them because I didn't know how to be anything else. Down here, the categories felt simple. There was the archive of life beneath my boots, and there was the red cylinder in my hand. The anti-archive, the thing you keep if you're afraid the archive might get used against you. The thing you keep if you're afraid life might persist when you're done with it. The thing you keep if you want power over everything that crawls and swims and breathes. And then there was me, a little mammal in a suit, holding the one piece that didn't belong. My thoughts twisted, ugly and honest. All those people topside had wronged me in small ways that added up to a lifetime. They'd used me, dismissed me, left me, mocked me, hurt me, and then told me I was too sensitive about it. And now one of them, the most polished, the most powerful, was telling me to hand him a possible extinction button like it was a fucking clipboard. I laughed, a short, sharp bark that sounded insane inside my helmet. Halden snapped, "What is funny?" "You," I said. "You're funny." Subject. "Call me by my name," I said, and my voice rose with anger I didn't know I still had. "Just once. Say my fucking name." Halden hesitated. He'd never cared enough to memorize it. Or if he had, he didn't want to give me that power. Finally, he said it like it tasted bad. "Mason." Hearing it down here made my throat tighten. My name in his mouth felt like theft. "Yes," I said. "Mason. The guy you were so happy to zip into a coffin and drop into a place sound doesn't enter. The guy you're about to write off as operational loss." "That is not," Halden started, but I cut him off. "Tell me the truth," I said. "Did you cut the fursuit?" Silence. "Did you?" I repeated. "Those allegations are absurd," Halden said, and the words were too smooth. Jesse's voice crackled faintly, a whisper slipping through. He did. Halden's voice sharpened. Shut that channel. Static roared, and Jesse vanished. My hand shook inside the suit. Something inside me, something tired, something that had been waiting years for permission to stop trying to be reasonable, finally sat up and looked around. Okay, it said. Okay, so this is what they are. I stared at the laminated card in my left hand, floating slightly on its clip. The rules were just ink now, but they had been treated like scripture. They'd handed them to me like they were protecting me. And yet here was Halden, already talking about pumping something through the line to force the sample up. Here was a man willing to flood my suit, kill me, contaminate whatever this place was as long as he got his trophy. Rules for thee, not for me. I tucked the laminated card back into my pocket, slow. It slid against my ribs like a cold tongue. As it went in, my fingers brushed something else in that pocket that I'd forgotten. A little square of yellow paper. A post-it. The text had stuck it there as a joke while I was suiting up, and I'd been too tense to rip it out. I pulled it free now. On it, in black marker, was a crude smiley face and 3 words in block letters. Don't get clever. I stared at it so long my eyes watered, because suddenly it wasn't a joke anymore. It was advice. Not from Halden, not from the commission, from some exhausted diver who'd seen what clever gets you in deep water. Clever gets you dead. Clever gets you trapped. Clever gets you believing you can outthink something bigger than you. And yet, don't get clever was also exactly what Halden wanted. He wanted obedience. He wanted me to be a camera with hands. My thumb crumpled the post-it. The paper bent, then tore, the marker bleeding along the crease. Halden, I said softly, if I bring you this red vial and you decide it's a weapon, what happens next? We will study it, he said. Too fast. We will secure it. We will. You will weaponize it, I said. That is a gross assumption. It's not, I said. It's a pattern. Another pause. I could hear him breathing now, too, faintly, like he'd leaned too close to his mic. Mason, he said, and it was almost gentle, almost human. You are under extreme stress. You're not thinking clearly. I laughed again, but this time it was bitter. Oh, I'm thinking clearer than I have in my whole goddamn life. I looked around the chamber. If this was a seed bank, then whoever made it had planned for discovery. They'd left a seam. They'd left the diagrams visible. They'd left a central pedestal. They'd built a place a human could enter. This wasn't lost. This was placed, which meant they'd anticipated someone like Halden. Someone hungry. Someone who would take without understanding. Maybe the red vial wasn't meant to be taken. Maybe it was meant to be chosen. Maybe the builders wanted to see if the first intelligent thing that found this place would be wise enough to leave it alone, or cruel enough to break it. My stomach clenched. My mouth went dry. I wasn't wise. I wasn't noble. I wasn't a hero. I was a hurt animal with a matchbook in my pocket and a room full of gasoline around me. I turned toward the open cavity with the human diagrams again. Male and female. Arms out. No cylinder in the depression. Empty. Like the human seed was gone. Like we'd already been released into the world long ago. Which meant the archive wasn't just for Earth. Or at least not for this Earth. It was a pantry. A toolkit. A God's shelf. And the red vial. The off switch. The anti-seed. The thing you keep under lock and skulls because you're afraid someone might use it out of spite. I thought of Elise again, not because she was special, but because she was the last person who'd looked me in the eyes and decided I wasn't worth the trouble. You take things too seriously, she'd said. In my head, her voice twisted and merged with Halden's. You're under extreme stress. You're not thinking clearly. I wanted to reach across the miles of water and years of humiliation and shove my fingers into their mouths. I wanted to be the one who decided something for once. My suit's warning light blinked. Oxygen reserve 78%. Still plenty. Still time. Halden kept talking. Threats now, thinly disguised. If you fail to comply, recovery resources will be withdrawn. You will be abandoned. Abandoned. Like it was something he could do to me now, as if I wasn't already. I lifted my light toward the seam curtain again. The strands didn't move. The black beyond didn't ripple. There was no outside waiting for me. There was only this place. And the only thing I could still control was what I did with what I held. "Halden," I said, "are there any organisms in these panels that look like us?" "What?" he said, thrown off. "Humans y clarifia. Are there any human cylinders?" He hesitated. The feed would have shown him the first cavity, the male and female diagram. He knew exactly what I meant. "Yes," he admitted. The drone identified a compartment labeled with human figures. "And it was empty," I said. "Yes," he said, voice clipped. "Irrelevant." "It's not," I said. "It means we're already out. We're already running. We're already the product." Halden's tone sharpened. "Do not anthropomorphize this. It is an archive, a resource." "It is not a resource," I repeated, tasting the word. "Yeah, that's exactly what you think everything is." I took a slow breath. I did the one thing rule foretold me not to do. I spoke into the silence without waiting for anything to return. "I'm not bringing you shit," I said. Halden exploded. "Mason, do you understand the legal ramifications?" "Eat my ass," I said, and it came out flat. Not even angry anymore. Just done. Static roared. Halden's channel cut, and for a few seconds, the cube's silence flooded back in, thick and absolute. My breathing slowed, not because I was calm, because something in me was finally accepting that panic wouldn't change the shape of this. I drifted closer to the pedestal again, red vial in hand. My other hand reached out and touched the pedestal's etch patterns. The suit's haptics buzzed softly. A low hum traveled up my arm. I looked up at the skulls. The one angled toward me seemed closer now. Not physically, intentionally. I whispered, because whispering felt like respect in a place like this, even if respect was pointless. Was this meant for me? I asked nobody. The red liquid inside the cylinder pulsed, just once like a heartbeat. I flinched. My suit's internal pressure gauge twitched. Micro adjustments. The suit compensating for something. The chamber felt subtly different. Like the air. There shouldn't be air, but there was my suit's bubble, my life support atmosphere. Like the air in my helmet had thickened. I swallowed hard. Okay, I thought. Okay, enough spiraling. If I couldn't get out, I could still do the job. Understand. I moved away from the pedestal and opened another floor panel. Careful this time. No striking. No clever levity. Just slow, steady pulling with servo assistance. The panel came free. Inside, a cylinder intact. Clear liquid. Pale strands. Diagram at the bottom. Something like a crab, but with too many limbs and a spine. I didn't touch the cylinder. I just stared. Then I moved to another panel. Opened it. Diagram, a bird. Cylinder missing. Depression empty. Another panel. Diagram, a reptile. Cylinder missing. Another. Diagram, a fish. Cylinder present. Pale strands. The pattern emerged fast. Some species were on shelf. Some had been taken out and presumably released. Some had never been placed, or had been removed long ago. The empty compartments weren't random. They clustered. I panned my light across the floor and realized the textures etched into each panel. The unique patterns weren't decorative. They were like labels, like codes, a grid, coordinates. If you could read it, you could find any species you wanted. I felt sick again, but this time with a weird, cold awe. This wasn't just storage. It was a system. And the pedestal, the red vial, was the one thing not stored under a panel like everything else. The one thing elevated, displayed, guarded, like a gun on a mantle. I crouched near one open cavity and watched the pale strands inside the intact cylinder. They didn't move. They just hung there, quiet, waiting, seeds asleep in fluid. In my mind, I saw the strands from the shattered vial rising, pulling toward the seam, toward up inside the cube, which meant whatever up was in here, it wasn't gravity. It was a path, a pipeline, a delivery system. The cube wasn't just storing life. It could release it, send it out, probably in the form of aerosolized material, microfilaments carried by water, carried by currents. And the red vial would do the same, only with something else. Not seeds, anti-seeds, a negation, a solvent. I remembered the taste of pennies in the suit bay, blood smell, old rainwater. I remembered Halden's perfect teeth. I remembered Jesse's trembling voice. And I remembered Elise saying my apartment smelled like loneliness. A thought came, sharp and mean. Maybe loneliness is just what you call it when someone stops feeding the machine. I stood and drifted back to the pedestal. The skulls above it seemed to loom more now, like my light had gotten weaker, like the chamber wanted to press me down. The clamps on the pedestal, now empty where the original red vial had been, waited like open fingers. I realized with a jolt that the red vial in my hand wasn't just a sample. It was the only one, the only red one, the only one not under a panel, the only one the skulls had been arranged around, which meant if I destroyed it, I wasn't just killing myself. I was triggering something the builders had made hard to trigger. My throat tightened. I tried to picture the world topside, the ship, the commission, the cameras, the ocean continuing to do its quiet work. If this red anti-seed rose through the seam, through whatever pipeline the cube had, it would go into the water column. It would ride currents. It would spread. It would reach plankton, fish, mammals, eventually us. It would do something, not necessarily kill, but shift, rewrite, erase. I didn't know, and that ignorance sat in my gut like lead. I could still choose not to. I could still just sit down on the floor and run out my oxygen and die quietly, leaving the vial intact, leaving Halden furious but contained. But then what? They'd send another diver, another suit, another subject, or they'd do what Jesse said, pump something through the line, force the sample up, force something dash, and Halden would have it. If not today, then eventually. Because people like Halden don't stop. They don't learn. They just reroute. I stared at the vial again. The red liquid folded on itself like it was thinking. My hand began to hurt from gripping it. The suit's feedback made my fingers feel stiff, swollen. I remembered the unknown creature diagram, the beaked thing. The vial had shattered as soon as I tried to remove it. Maybe because it wasn't meant to be removed. Maybe because the cube had decided I wasn't authorized. But the red vial hadn't shattered. It had let me take it. It had even released itself from the clamps without tools. As if it wanted to be held by a living hand. As if the last step had to be personal. I heard my own voice in my head from a moment earlier. I'm thinking clearer than I have in my whole goddamn life. Clear thinking, I realized, doesn't always lead to good choices. Sometimes it just leads to honest ones. I keyed the comms one last time. Jesse. Nothing. Ops, I tried. Static. Then, faintly, Halden's voice again, like he'd forced his way back onto the channel. Mason, he said, and his tone had changed. Not anger. Something closer to pleading, which scared me more. Listen to me. You are holding something of immeasurable importance. Whatever you are thinking, stop. We could bring you back. We can. I cut him off quietly. You cut the first suit. Silence. That silence was my answer. Halden exhaled, and when he spoke again, the polish was gone. That suit was unacceptable. It was a prototype. You are alive because we corrected it. You're a liar, I said, and my voice didn't even shake now. And you're scared because you don't control this. We can make you whole, Halden said, desperate now, grasping. We can pay you. We can clear your record. We can. I laughed, but it wasn't bitter this time. It was genuinely amused, which felt insane. Clear my record, I repeated. That's what you think I want. He didn't answer because he didn't know what else to say. I took the red vial fully out of the sample sleeve. I held it in my bare right glove, alone, like a cigarette between fingers. My thumb traced the glass. Smooth, real, fragile. The skull overhead stared down at me with its one wrong angle. The post-it in my pocket, crumpled and torn, pressed against my ribs. Don't get clever. Maybe the least clever thing I could do, was exactly what my hurt human brain wanted to do. Not outthink, not negotiate, just end the game. I raised the vial closer to my helmet light. The red liquid inside wasn't opaque anymore. I could see darker strands suspended in it. Thin, thread-like shapes like the ones in the clear cylinders, but denser like clotted ink. They drifted slowly, following a pattern I didn't recognize. And then, as I watched, one strand pressed itself gently against the glass from the inside, as if testing it. My skin crawled under the suit. Halden's voice rose in panic. "Do not break it. Do you hear me? Do not." I didn't answer him. I looked down at the floor, at the panel seams, at the carved diagrams, at the empty human cavity. Then I looked up at the skulls again, and I imagined them not as guardians, but as witnesses who refused to watch because they already knew. My chest hurt, not from pressure, from something older and uglier. All those people who wronged me came up first, like the original ugly thought in the example you gave me. But in my mind, it wasn't poetic. It was petty. It was faces and voices in small moments. My supervisor calling me useful, Elise laughing, Halden calling me subject, everyone telling me I was too much trouble, too serious, too emotional, too human. And then, behind them, the bigger thing, humanity itself. Us, all of us, running around on a fragile crust pretending we deserve anything. Pretending we're entitled to continue. Pretending we've earned the right not to be turned off. Who am I to choose for everyone else? That thought showed up like it always does in stories, like a last-minute conscience. And right behind it came the uglier answer, just as fast. Who are they to choose this life for me? They chose it every time they used me. Every time they cut corners. Every time they decided some other person's safety was a line item. They fucked me, and part of me, small, mean, honest, wanted to fuck them back. Not just them. Everything they stood on. My hand tightened around the vial. The glass didn't break yet. It held, stubborn. I clenched harder. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, softly, like a secret, the glass cracked. A spiderweb fracture bloomed under my thumb, white against red. Halden screamed my name, but it came through distorted, far away, like he was underwater too. I squeezed. The cylinder shattered in my fist. It didn't explode outward like the floor vial had. It collapsed inward first, like the glass wanted to cut me. And then it gave way in a sharp crunch that sent pain screaming up my fingers even through the suit's feedback. Shards drove into the glove. The suit registered punctures. Alarm icons flashed in my HUD. And the red liquid, God, the red liquid, hit my glove lining and the suit's inner seal like it was hungry. I felt it as heat at first, a sudden burn that made me jerk my hand back instinctively. Then the heat became pain. Not skin pain. Not I cut myself pain. This was deeper, chemical, like the liquid had skipped past surface and went straight for the idea of flesh. My fingers spasmed inside the glove. Halden's voice was a frantic blur. "Stop. Neutralize. Flush the glove. Mason, you have to." But there was no flush. No neutralose. No fix. The suit alarm screamed silently in my HUD. Seal failure. Integrity compromised. Contamination. The red liquid seeped through the punctures like it was pouring itself into me. It didn't behave like water. It crawled. I watched, horrified, as thin red tendrils threaded along the inside of my glove, slipping toward my wrist. Then the burn hit my arm. I screamed. It was a real scream, a full-body animal sound, and it bounced around inside my helmet and came back at me double brutal. For a second, I couldn't breathe because my own voice clogged my throat. The red liquid pulsed through the glove's lining and into my suit's micro-seals, and I felt the suit try to compensate. Tiny pressure shifts, micro-valves snapping shut. Too late. My forearm felt like it was being dissolved, like my bones were chalk and acid. I tore my own glove with my left hand, tried to rip it off, forgetting the obvious. The glove was integrated, locked, part of the seal. Removing it would be like opening an airlock at 3 miles deep. So I just clawed at myself, useless. The pain rushed up my arm in waves, hot and cold at the same time. My vision tunneled. In my HUD, oxygen remained stable, pressure stable, all the metrics that should have mattered were fine. But inside, my body was going wrong fast. The red liquid reached my wrist. I felt something pop, like a joint giving way, like tissue melting. I gagged. My stomach lurched. If I puked in a helmet now, I would drown in my own panic. I tried to breathe slow. In, out, in. Rule 4 flashed in my mind again, absurdly like a joke. If audio drops to 0, do not speak for 10 seconds. As if silence could save me now. The pain slammed in my elbow, then my upper arm. It wasn't traveling through veins the way normal poison would. It was rewriting me, dissolving me, unmaking. My suit's internal temperature spiked. The heaters kicked off, cooling engaged. The system fought to maintain optimal human environment, while my human environment turned into soup. I looked down at my right hand. The glove's outer layer had been cut by glass shards, and through the tear I saw something I still don't fully believe I saw. The red liquid had soaked the inner layer, and the material beneath it, white polymer mesh, was turning translucent. As if it was being eaten, the fibers frayed, then vanished. Not torn, not burned, just gone. Behind it, my own skin, what I could see through the suit feedback overlay, blushed red, then dark, then seemed to sag like wax near flame. The pain made me want to black out, but the suit's stimulants kicked in automatically, injecting something to keep me conscious because conscious operator is preferable to unconscious liability. Thanks. The world tilted. My knees buckled. I slammed onto the panel floor, boots slipping on seams. Rule 2. Do not strike the interior surfaces. I just done it. Hard. For a heartbeat. The chamber responded. Not with sound, with sensation. A low vibration traveled up through the floor into my legs. A hum so deep my suit didn't even register it as audio, but my bones did. It shook my teeth. It felt like standing near a massive engine. The skulls overhead seemed to blur as my light jittered. And the red liquid, what remained of it, lifted. Not all of it. Some was in my glove, in my arm, burning through me. But the droplets that had splashed out into the chamber's water didn't disperse like dye. They formed tiny spheres, each one clinging to itself, surface tension too strong, refusing dilution. Then they began to rise, straight up, like the pale strands from the clear vial. Only this time it was red, dark, thick, purposeful. And as it rose, it left behind a faint trail. Not color, not smoke, but a shimmering distortion in the water, like heat haze. I watched it through tears I didn't know I was shedding inside my helmet. Halden's voice was still there, distant and frantic. You idiot. You absolute. His words collapsed into static again, as if the cube was bored of him. Good. My arm was gone now, in any meaningful sense. The pain had spread into my shoulder, into my chest. I felt it in my ribs, like the red liquid had learned the map of my body and was following it with enthusiasm. My suit alarm screamed new warnings. Internal flood detected. Water. I hadn't noticed at first because pain is a loud room. But the suit's punctures, glass shards, dissolved seals had allowed the ocean in. At this depth, water doesn't leak. It invades. It forces itself into any weakness with the patience of something eternal. I felt cold on my forearm, then on my chest, like hands pressing ice against me. Then the cold became pressure. My suit fought back, compensating, pumping, sealing, trying to keep a boundary. But the boundary was dissolving the same way I was. The red liquid hit my chest like a wave. My sternum felt like it was being peeled open from the inside. My throat tightened. I couldn't draw a full breath. I thrashed on the floor like a dying fish, boots scraping panels, arms jerking, body trying to escape a cage it couldn't leave. Above me, the red spheres continued rising, toward the seam, toward the curtain of pale strands. As my vision blurred, I saw the curtain twitch, not swaying, parting. The pale strand responded to the red, like hair responding to static, lifting and shifting to make room. The seam, dark wound in the wall, opened, not mechanically, but behaviorally, like the cube was allowing passage. The red anti-seed streamed upward like a prayer in reverse. And still, inside my suit, more red liquid burned through me. It reached my neck, my jaw, my tongue, my mouth filled with a taste like metal and rot, like pennies and spoiled meat. I gagged again. This time something thick and warm flooded my throat. Blood? Maybe. Or just me coming apart. I tried to scream again, but the scream turned into a wet choke. My helmet fogged at the edges. Water climbed inside the suit, now in earnest, cold and heavy. It hit my abdomen, my groin, and the pain spiked so hard I saw white. My body wasn't just being drowned. It was being dissolved at the same time. Seeking muscle, bone, identity. I felt my fingers, my right hand, the one that had held the vial, become numb, then wrong, as if the concept of fingers no longer applied. The suit's tactile feedback went haywire, buzzing, then cutting out. My HUD glitched, letters smeared, warnings overlapped until they were unreadable. In the chaos, the laminated rule card floated free of my chest pocket, tugged out by the rushing water inside the suit. It bumped against my chin guard, spinning slowly. The black printed rules stared at me, warped by water and light. Rule 5. If you locate a freestanding object, do not remove it unless it is mechanically secured. A deceptively safe rule. Now it read like a punchline. Because the red vial had been mechanically secured, it had been meant to be removed. It had been meant to be broken by a hand that could bleed. The cube hadn't been protecting itself from me. It had been guiding me toward the one choice that mattered. My mind flashed to every panel, every diagram. Seeds asleep in glass. Life organized like inventory. And now this. Now the off switch rising out of the chamber. Was it revenge? Was it a test? Was it just a trap waiting for the first bitter little mammal to stumble in and do exactly what bitter mammals do? I didn't know. I still don't. My last clear thought wasn't heroic. It wasn't philosophical. It was small and personal and ugly. I hope you're watching, Halden. I hope you get it on every fucking camera. Because for once, you don't get to decide what happens next. The red spheres hit the seam and vanished into the black beyond, streaming upward like blood through a vein. I pictured them moving through the water column, rising fast, carried by currents, spreading into the world above. I pictured fish, plankton, whales, people. I pictured Elise laughing, then stopping mid-laugh as something invisible crawled into her lungs. I picture my supervisor's smirk melting off his face. I pictured cities full of lights blinking out. It wasn't catharsis. Not really. It was just imagining company in my pain. The water inside my suit turned red as more of the liquid evaporated the moment it touched air bubbles, staining them like tiny hearts that floated upward. The bubbles rose too, eager, climbing through the suit's collapsing seals toward the seam, toward that path the cube had defined. Every time a bubble popped against my visor, the red vapor hissed and vanished, leaving a smear like lipstick on glass. My chest caved inward as pressure won. The suit couldn't hold shape anymore. It flexed, then buckled. The ocean didn't crush me all at once. It peeled me apart, molecule by molecule, while the anti-seed did its own work inside me. I felt my bones soften. I felt my teeth loosen. I felt my thoughts lose edges like sandcastle walls in a tide. The skulls overhead blurred into a ring of shadows. The one angled toward me, watching, seemed almost satisfied. Or maybe those my dying brain, desperate to assign meaning. As darkness closed in, I heard something that wasn't my breathing. A faint, deep hum like the cube exhaling. Not angry, not alarmed, just done with me. My vision narrowed to a tunnel of light around the seam, around the rising red haze, around the last proof that I had acted, that I had decided something in a life where everyone else had decided for me. Then even that faded. And in the last half second before everything went black, I realized the most terrifying part wasn't dying down here. It was knowing I'd set something in motion that didn't care about my reasons. The ocean above would take it, spread it, feed it, and whatever the red anti-seed did, it would do it without my spite, without my heartbreak, without my petty little list of enemies. It would do it because it had been built to, and I had simply been the hand that finally squeezed.